First disclaimer, this video is to preserve the history of previous conflicts our country has been involved in. The information presented here is for educational purposes only. Second disclaimer, I have no personal experience with this stuff. I am not current or former military. I am presenting information to you as I have learned it from studying the war, through books, through interviews, and through other relevant material. We do not have to rediscover the wheel for ourselves to trust that it works. We would never make any progress that way. We make use of the knowledge of those that went before us and the lessons they've learned, and we learn from their mistakes. All that to say that although I do not have any personal experience, we can trust that these concepts I'm going to present to you today are accurate. Over time, we can add our own experiences to them as we train this stuff, but studying what others have done gives us a good starting point. I'm going to approach this subject today as a civilian and as a partisan, assuming that the scenario is we are already actively engaged in combat and we have some sort of a team around us, whether that be 3 guys or 12 guys. But also keep in mind that all these techniques I'm going to share with you have been employed on an individual level as well, so they are viable for you as an individual as well as a team. As soon as you enter a contested environment, you always have to assume that you immediately have picked up enemy trackers. In Vietnam, our special reconnaissance teams started to employ their counter-tracking and deception techniques before they ever set foot in their area of operations. This would sometimes include things like multiple helicopters landing at multiple different landing zones, only deploying one team. This was to confuse enemy trackers as to where the team even started the mission at. After insertion into the area of operation, many different counter-tracking techniques were employed. I'm going to share with you a few of those I have learned from studying the war. First, before deploying any counter-tracking methods, you need to weigh the time it will take to employ the technique versus the value of separation distance you could gain on your pursuers if you just kept moving. The first technique is going to be laying false trails, simply creating false trails that the tracker team has to rule out to find your true direction of travel. This is going to buy you time and allow you to gain distance on your pursuers. A good place to deploy this kind of technique is at a stream or river crossing. You would simply cross the water obstacle, re-enter it, go up or downstream, and enter and exit multiple times. This small creek right here is not the greatest place to employ this technique because the water is very shallow and you can actually see underneath the water surface where I've stepped, but you get the idea. Also, you would want to do this relatively far apart. I did that really close in and out right here so you guys could see, but you would want to stretch that out quite a bit more than that. Also, just keep in mind that streams and rivers and even creeks are danger areas. You have less of a canopy overhead to shield you, and you also have longer lines of sights down these waterways. So the next counter-tracking technique is going to be frequent changes in direction. This is going to accomplish much the same thing as laying false trails, except none of your trails are going to be false. So you're actually going to be traveling these trails in such a way they will confuse the trackers. I'm going to show you 2 movement techniques. First movement technique is called the box technique. This is going to rely on your compass and your pace count to make multiple 90-degree turns to cross your own back trail. So if you start here, you would make multiple 90-degree turns to create your first box, and you're going to be crossing your own back trail right here. You're going to go for a certain distance, and you're going to do it again. Compass and pace count, 90-degree turns, cross your own back trail. What this is going to do is cause your trackers to come to this intersection and actually have 3 different directions of travel that they're going to have to chase down to figure out which one is the true direction of travel. This is going to do a couple things for you. Number one, it's going to buy time as your trackers are stuck at this first box trying to figure out what is going on, and it's going to give you the ability to possibly set up an ambush on your back trail. We'll talk about that more here in just a second. The second technique is going to be a figure 8. It's very similar to the box technique in that you're crossing your own back trail and creating a T intersection, but you're not using a compass, 90-degree turns, and your pace count to do it. You're just going to come and you're just going to form a loop. Cross your own back trail, come up, form another loop. So it's similar to the box technique, but this is going to be a little bit easier for you to implement in the field. You're going to have less likelihood of getting lost. So the reason for that is that you're going to be looping around terrain features. Say this was a hilltop, say you're in a mountainous area, you can just loop around hilltops. Using terrain features with this technique is going to make it a little bit easier for you to implement, as well as a little bit easier for you to maintain awareness of where you are in your area of operation, because you're actually referencing terrain features on your map, not just boxing out in the middle of the woods. So that is a major advantage of this technique. True account from the Vietnam War, there was a survivor of an ambushed special reconnaissance team that was able to survive for 3 days and dispatch 6 enemy combatants during that time by implementing this figure 8 technique and ambushing his own back trail before he was rescued. So the next thing is over socks. You can carry a large pair of socks that will actually fit on over your boots. This is going to do 2 things for you. This is going to soften your tread print on your boot, and this is going to make it more difficult for a tracker team to determine how old that track is. Why is softening your tread print important? Well, most militaries have a standardized footwear. At least a military unit in an area is going to have probably a standardized footwear that they're wearing. So being able to determine your tracks from their tracks is going to be important to them. Oftentimes, if you're operating in a very contested environment, that means there are also enemy patrols happening in that same environment. If you can convince the tracker team that they have actually messed up and they are tracking one of their own patrols, then they're probably going to abandon tracking your team, which is obviously going to be beneficial for you. So you can see this boot print right here. I'm going to go ahead and step beside of it with this oversock on and let you compare the difference. While the oversock technique is very effective, you want to use it sparingly. Wearing these socks over rough terrain is going to cause them to degrade relatively quickly. When they degrade, they're going to start depositing some of that material from the sock, which a tracker team is going to pick up on, and it's going to alert them to the technique that you're using. The next thing is going to be carrying used cigarette butts in a small baggie with you into the field. They don't need to be anything special, just basic cigarettes. What you're going to do with these is periodically drop one on your back trail as you're moving. What this is going to do is make the tracking team think that the team that they are tracking is undisciplined. You should never smoke because it's bad for your health, but you certainly should never smoke in the field. That can be smelled for a very long ways away. Remember, you want the tracking team to think that you're undisciplined. You don't want to actually be undisciplined. Another thing we can do is just carry a small squirt bottle of animal blood with us and squirt this on our back trail as we're moving. The goal here is to convince the enemy trackers that we are burdened with a casualty. That's going to mean that we as a team are moving a little bit slower and we're a little bit less lethal because we're not at our full strength since we're down a man or maybe more. So what does either of these things do for us? The cigarette butts, squirting blood on the back trail, what are we looking to accomplish here? The goal is the same with both of them. We want the enemy tracker element to speed up and to drop their security posture as much as possible. The cigarettes accomplish this by making the tracker element think that they are tracking an undisciplined, undangerous team. And the blood does this by making the tracker element think that they are tracking a team that is burdened with a casualty, meaning we are not as strong and that we are moving slower. Either of these are going to lure that tracking element into tracking faster and being a little bit less secure. That is going to set them up for an ambush. Before we talk about how to actually implement an ambush, we need to determine why we're needing to implement that ambush in the first place. If you are evading trackers and employing counter-tracking techniques as a team, but the tracker element is still closing distance on you, it's one of 3 reasons. Either you suck at counter-tracking, the tracking element is really good at their job, or your team has been infiltrated by an enemy agent who is leaving obvious sign for the tracking team to follow. In Vietnam, our special reconnaissance teams often had indigenous team members attached to them. Those indigenous team members were infiltrated by enemy agents, and oftentimes they did sabotage our team's counter-tracking by leaving obvious sign. Operating as partisans, we have to keep in mind that this is a very real threat that we will face as well. The possibility of our group and our team being infiltrated by enemy agents is very real. We are going to be operating in our home area. This gives the enemy leverage to use against us that they would not otherwise have if we were operating in a foreign environment. That leverage is going to be our friends, our loved ones, and people that we care about. Don't discount the possibility that one of your friends and team members who otherwise are loyal to the cause could be coerced by the enemy into sabotaging your group and your mission. This could occur because despite your best efforts, one of your team has been identified, their families have been taken, threatened, and leveraged against them. So with that being said, how do you actually know if an enemy tracker element is closing in on you? Well, the first way that you can tell is patterned gunshots. These are gunshots they're going to be using to communicate with either a split element or an additional element that they have pushed out in front of you, trying to box you in. The next is going to be increased overflights by either observation or combat aircraft. That means that either the aircraft has spotted you and they're keeping an eye on you, or the tracker team has a relatively good idea where you are and they're communicating with that aircraft, trying to help that aircraft spot you. The third is going to be detection of tracker teams at danger areas, like road crossings, river crossings, or open fields. Like I just mentioned, oftentimes the tracking element will split, or they will push out an additional element to try to box you in if they think they know where you're going. So once you get to some of these danger areas and you have more line of sight, if you can detect enemy tracker elements in front of you, then that's a good way of knowing that your counter tracking is not working. So we've implemented counter tracking. For whatever reason that counter tracking is not working, we've been able to determine by one or multiple reasons that the enemy is closing in on us. So at this point, our option is to set an ambush. Well, how do we do that? You do this by utilizing first one of these movement techniques I showed you guys earlier. Now you're going to want to set your ambush on your right-hand side of your back trail. The reason for that is that 90% of people in the world are right-handed, meaning when they're walking, their weapon is slung and pointed slightly to their left. Because of this, they're going to be able to react slightly quicker to their left-hand side than they will be able to their right-hand side. That 1 second in reaction gap time is going to be incredibly important for you when you initiate that ambush to gain fire superiority on them. So the first type of ambush is going to be a linear ambush. The positives to this type of ambush is it's the quickest to deploy, it's the easiest to control, and team reunification after the ambush is not required. Now the negative to this is that you may not have optimal fields of fire because you are all on a line firing straight forward. So linear, all your guys are going to be on this line. These guys are all going to have fields of fire to the front. Now, on your corners, this would be a good place to emplace people that have rapid fire weapons, say like FRTs nowadays. This will give you a little bit of overlapping fire across this battlefield. But basically, your whole team is on a line firing forwards into this unalive box right here. The next type of ambush is going to be an L ambush. So the positives to this is it is still relatively easy to deploy, it is relatively easy to control, and you have better fields of fire because you are firing from two directions. The negatives is that you have to have a more disciplined team to be able to pull this off, and team reunification, while relatively easy, is required, and it does consume time after the ambush takes place. So the big difference here is that your team is set up in an L fashion. That way you're covering the unalive box from two different angles. This is a superior ambush formation to the linear ambush because this gives you more fields of fire, which equates to your enemy having less places to take cover. But like I said, this is going to require a more disciplined team because fratricide also becomes easier if you do not have disciplined soldiers who know their fields of fire and their limits of fire. That's going to be it for today. There's a lot more stuff to this, so I encourage you guys to get out there and start studying this on your own. But if there are any other specific topics you guys want some videos on, then drop a comment down below this video and let me know what things you want to see. And I'll do my best with my knowledge to share some of this stuff with you. So yeah, thanks for watching.